Hello, Marleen. Nice to see you. Thank you for joining me.
Hello, Emma.
So, let's get to know you a bit then in terms of your Quaker journey. Can you tell us a bit about how you came to Quakers and what were you seeking and what did you find?
So I went to my first Quaker meeting in 1997 in Belgium. I'm originally from Belgium, have been in the UK for 25 years now. But so in 1997, a British friend in Brussels told me that I might get something out of going to Quaker meeting because I was struggling with stress, with psychological issues, was in therapy. Um, and so this friend took me to meeting. I had never heard of Quakers. I was brought up as a Catholic, had not looked at anything Catholic for a very long time. But in Belgium, you don't really come across Quakers. Even today, when I mention Quakers to my parents, they go like, that must be a weird sect or something, you know. So anyway, I did go to my first Quaker meeting there at Quaker House in Brussels, where they also have an office for QCEA, the Quaker Center for European Studies or something. I can't remember the exact name. And it was totally for me. We sat in silence with 6 or 7 people, a very small group. And I just felt I needed silence and I needed something more spiritual in my life. At the same time, I was also exploring Buddhist meditation. So I was attracted to the silence, going on a Vipassana retreat, just doing silent insight meditation. Um, was also something I felt I needed at that time. Um, but yes, I felt immediately at home. It was very much spiritual, though. I didn't go into anything of the Quaker background then, the
Mm.
Christian background. I still had quite a lot of resistance around anything to do with church and Christianity. Um, but you know, I went a few times and I really enjoyed the silence and the ministry that came up for people. It just all made sense to me. It was a lot about peace, from what I remember. And there was a candle in the middle of the room, which later on I realized was not such something that most Quakers do, having a candle in the middle of the room. So, but yes, I went on and off there. And then 2 years later, in 99, I moved to Britain and ended up in Brighton
Okay.
and became a very regular attender at Brighton meeting, which was so different because it's a huge meeting.
Mm.
I mean, compared to Brussels, 9, 7, 8, 9 people, Brighton was, I think, 50 or 60 people every Sunday. Um, and I became much more involved in the life of the meeting there. So it was not just going to meeting on a Sunday, but also getting involved with activism there. So it was a meeting that was involved in refugee issues. Then we were, yeah, campaigning to abandon the voucher system for refugees.
Mm.
As so that they would get money instead of vouchers and weren't limited to which shops they could go to. So that kind of stuff. And it gave me a circle of friends, a new family, having moved on my own to, I was already in my 30s then, and did an MPhil at Sussex University.
Okay.
But the Quaker group became a kind of more like a family to me. And at the same time, I was exploring my spirituality more, keeping on doing Buddhist meditation as well, but not really. I was very, and I am still impressed by the Buddhist teachings,
Mm.
but I don't feel that I want to become a Buddhist or that I want to uh, um, yeah, be part of a Buddhist circle. Whereas Quakers, I guess with hindsight, I am from here, from the West. The Christianity is in my blood, is in my family.
Mm.
And it just took me quite a while to come to grips with, how do I relate to this, the fact that Quakers also has a Christian root that is very different from having been brought up as a Catholic and having a lot of problems with the church. Um, so, but yes, anyway, the Quakers, I wouldn't have called it my faith, but it was very important for me those 2 years in Brighton. And then after that, there was a bit of a gap, just going to a meeting from time to time wherever I was. But spiritually, I was interested in the teachings of Krishnamurti, or I became interested in my exploration of spirituality. And I went to live and work for 3.5 years in Hampshire in the Krishnamurti Center, which is where adults can come to learn more about the teachings of Krishnamurti. And there was also a school attached to it, Brockwood Park School. So when I lived there for 3.5 years, I didn't go to a meeting at all. Maybe once or twice on a weekend, on a visit to London. I had a good friend who went to Westminster meeting.
Mm.
So visited, went to a meeting there maybe once or twice, not more than once or twice a year while I was there. And then a big change in my life, spiritually, and I guess faith-wise as well, was at the end of 2006, one of my best friends died. And I had the blessing on the one hand to spend a lot of time with her in her last weeks. And I was in my early 40s then, and she was 46 or something. And I had been to, years before that, we had visited Jerusalem together, she and I. And she had taken the Bible and I had taken the Quran. And so we had this kind of thing about, what is right and what is wrong. And I had spent a lot of time in India by then, had studied Hinduism, Buddhism, and Islam for my academic studies. That was actually before I came to the UK. That was still in the late 80s.
Right.
And for me, it was all the same thing, God.
Mm.
Everyone talks about this God, and every religion, and whether they are lying on the floor in a temple saying, to the gods, thanks to the gods, or the Muslims pray to the earth. Actually, I found that more interesting than sitting in a church and listening to a priest telling me what to do and not to do, and having to feel guilty for my sins. So I found other types of worship actually more attractive.
Mm.
Um, And anyway, my friend was talking a lot about, oh, I should have done that and I should have done this. And I had this dream and I never even spoke with you about it, but, something I could have done. And I kept telling her, that it's fine, whatever happens, all will be well. I must have picked that already up from some Quaker talk or Julian of
Julian
North.
Norwich. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, but anyway, so when she died, I thought I need to do something radically different with my life and take time out because I wasn't really happy at the Krishnamurti Center either. Um, and I decided to leave everything and go and live in Canada for a year, together with my then partner, trying, just exploring something about, what do we want to do next, and hoping to bring, in one way or the other, more healing to the world.
Mm.
And for me personally, like, yes, what do I want to do? Do I have a dream, like my friend, that I should try to follow, and not have any regrets? God forbid I get cancer next year or whatever. So that year I did a lot of, so I lived in Canada for a year and I just read and read and read, did more therapy, did quite a few extreme shamanic things around healing and connecting with the universe. But in my darkest moments that I really felt I needed help, and was working with guides and shamanic guides and guidance, it was Jesus who came to me out of, I'm over there in Canada, I'm thinking more about Buddhism, etc. I did read the Karen Armstrong books. I was really impressed by her memoir, her two memoirs, and how she came from this life in as a nun to understanding God totally differently. But anyway, it was Jesus who came to me as a fisherman, in a kind of vision, dream, whatever you want to call it. And then also, I felt I needed to pray. And the prayer was our Lord's Prayer, the Lord's Prayer.
Mm.
In Dutch, we say our Lord, our Father. So anyway, in the end, after a year, ended up back in the UK and started to become a regular attender in Wandsworth meeting, South London, and joined their Bible reading group, and felt that I had found a home spiritually. And I was living then with someone who had chronic fatigue, and the Quakers were my everything. They were my family, my friends, my support group. My best friends today are from that meeting. People who have also left, who live somewhere else now. And today I think I can call it my faith, but I've struggled all these years with saying I have a faith. But over the last couple of years, I hear myself tell people, new people that I meet in my life, I'm a Quaker.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm still not in membership. I'm actually just in the process of becoming a member. So after, yes, more than or around 10 years at Wandsworth meeting, where friends told me all the time, Marleen, how come you're not a member yet? And Marleen kept saying, well, I was brought up as a Catholic and I don't think I can ever become part of a church again. And Quakers is still a church. It's still an institution. And I know there are no priests. No one is ever going to tell me what I should and shouldn't do. But I had this resistance to become a member of. But the last couple of years, I feel like maybe I've been sitting on the fence too long, and it's really a bit ridiculous to do this. Maybe it's a bit childish to hold on to this not wanting to become a member. And I think with Quakers, I also see there were a lot of things I could do. I got involved in committee meetings, etc. I also worked for Quakers for many years. And of course, one doesn't have to be a member to work for Quakers. One doesn't even have to be a Quaker, but I was a very regular attender in those years that I worked for Quakers. So actually, during the day, I had my day job working for Quakers, and on Sunday, I had my Quaker meeting and my Quaker friends. So, but so what I have always appreciated about Quakers is that there is no pressure. So you can be an attender for as long as you want to, and still be very involved and be accepted as a friend and um, join in deep stuff spiritually, but also get involved in all sorts of practical things. And I think that may be partly also a problem. I know over the years I've met a lot of people who have come to Quakers and stayed for a while and then left again.
Mm.
And they could attend, like me, for maybe 20 years and never become a member. And of course, then you don't really grow the society of friends. But I think there is a blessing in that it's a free and open space where everyone can feel at home if they want to come to a meeting for worship and feel what that is, that of God inside. So yes, so where I am now, there is a big meeting, but there is also a very small meeting outside town that meets only once a month for people who don't easily can get into town. And I get much more out of that small meeting of 5, 6, or 7 people. And I feel I can get a deeper connection with that of God in me and in the others. We're sitting in a church. There used to be, he died a couple of years ago, but there was a more than a couple of years ago before I started going there. A Quanglican, a Quaker Anglican, who said that the Quakers could use, because the church is not used every Sunday for services anymore in those small villages, so that the Quakers could use once a month the church for a Quaker meeting. And so usually there's 6 or 7 of us. And it's very simple. And I think simplicity is something in my faith that I find very important, which is core for Quakers. We come together, we sit down, 45 minutes, we don't do an hour. It ends, we have a chat, and we leave. So there's no tea and coffee, there's no rota to have to look at, there are no notices. But that's because we are part of the bigger meeting. And I often disappear when I go to a bigger meeting. I often disappear right after meeting because I feel I have had such a deep experience of God, of the spiritual, of the light within all of us, that I don't really feel I'm able to immediately go into chit chat and coffee. And
Yeah.
I will I will do it if I have to. And if I do the coffee rota, of course, I feel it's lovely to do the service. But yes, I've always struggled with that busyness
Mm.
right after meeting when you're in a big meeting. So I rather stay and sit for a bit longer and then have a few chats in the meeting room before going out.
Mm.
Uh, yes, so actually I'm quite excited for the moment about becoming a member. Um, as I said, I worked for Quakers for almost 10 years, I think. And the beginning of it was quite spectacular. I applied and got a job to help organize the World Conference of Quakers in Kenya in 2012.
Okay.
And had to go to Kenya once or twice before the conference to work together with Kenyan Quakers. And I think, as you know, Quakers in Kenya are became Quakers because of the missionaries from the United States, and so they have,
Mm.
yeah, so they have what do they call them now? I've forgotten. Ministers, of course, and they have a theological school, and people do Bible study, and they have big churches with actually church services, but and often also with healing in the service. Um, and also a bit of silence, but not sitting silent. So it's a very different way of
Mm.
uh, doing Quakerism.
Yeah.
But I met the most lovely people there. And then when the World Conference itself was happening, having people from all over the world coming together. So I met more Americans than people from Britain, but also from all over the world, Latin America, other African countries outside Kenya have small hubs of Quakers. Then, of course, the Australian, New Zealand, etc.
Wow.
Yes, so that was quite an experience, actually. And then after that, I started to work for Quakers in Britain. And got involved in organizing a Quaker Life representative council that used to happen twice a year. And through that, I met people from all over the country, Quakers from all over the country, and could hear what was important for them during those councils. And I guess that enriched my Quakerism.
Mm.
Yeah. And there I also became then involved in supporting Quaker prison chaplains. And they took me into prisons from time to time. And I wanted to do that, support Quaker prison chaplains, because before I came to this country, so more than 25 years ago, I had worked with refugees and migrant workers, and I had tried to help people who were locked up in detention centers. And I had visited detention centers, which are run like prisons, to organize training for people who work in the detention centers to be more open to people of a diverse background coming into those detention centers. And that experience had been so, on the one hand, horrendous, and on the other hand, like, you know, so much work needs doing behind closed bars. And of course, I don't agree with the system of detention of innocent people, and even with prison, it's becoming more and more difficult to know, you know, what's the right thing to do, going inside or doing the activism on the outside to get a better situation inside prison. But because of all those experiences, and I stopped working for Quakers in 2021. The last couple of years, I felt a calling to become a prison chaplain myself. And so partly because I know I have to be in membership, I guess that then has also triggered that process of, you know, becoming a member, so that I can officially, if it's going to happen, it will depend still on quite a bit of discernment. But so I think that's where I am with my faith for the moment, and happy to call myself a Quaker, and yeah.
Gosh. Well, what a story. I mean, that's just such a fascinating journey, really, covering a lot of the globe as well as a lot of different faith traditions. And obviously, I've known you in latter years through the Quaker Life connection. But can I go back to some of the things you said early on? Can I ask you a few things around um, Christianity first of all? Because I'm really intrigued what you were saying about a resistance that you felt to Catholicism and perhaps to Christianity more generally. And I really resonate with that. I found that in my 20s. I was very, very suspicious, probably is the word, and certainly resistant. I wonder if you can say a bit more about that as to what do you think the resistance was? Is it something that happens to us in youth? You know, is that what it is? Is it simply a matter of age that is just a natural process that we have both experienced? And I'm just so intrigued that it was Jesus that came to you in a dream. I mean, that's amazing as well. Yeah, so what do you make of all that?
I'm not sure. I don't think one can generalize about that. It's something that happens in our youth, and then we turn against it, and then we go back to it. I I have been back to church, Catholic and Anglican, not because I really want to or believe in anything that is said there by the vicar or by the priest. Mainly, you know, to please others, or because it's a wedding or a funeral. Um, but you know, by the time I was 14, so I thought, like, I really don't want to go to church anymore with my parents, you know, and that's just a teenage thing,
Hmm.
partly. But also at that time, I started to receive, or our family started to receive letters from my great uncle, who was a Jesuit priest in Calcutta.
Oh.
And he had never come back. He never came back to Belgium, but so he was my grandfather's um, brother. Yes, great uncle. Yeah. Um, and I just started to be interested in a world totally outside
Mm.
myself and outside Europe, Belgium. And yeah, so in a sense, by his letters, he opened up a world, you know, things about India and what they were doing as Jesuit priests in Calcutta, teaching, but also working with the community that lived around them, where their big school
Mm.
is in Calcutta. Um, And through those letters, I started to be interested in India, and I read everything I could find about India. And that's why I then ended up, by the time I was 18, I studied Orientalism, Oriental studies, and specialized in India, the Indian subcontinent. And at 18 was able to go to India for the first time on a tour with a professor studying temple architecture, but also just exploring what it felt like to be in that country. Um, and so, and yes, the Catholicism and the Christianity. I just, I mean, in the Catholic Church, with the Pope and everything, it's just too, for me, it's just too crazy to be true. That, yeah, that one can believe that that is right, you know. But then I met this Jesuit priest later on. Not him, he died by the time I made it to Calcutta. But I met his people who had lived with him there in Calcutta. And I was uh, very welcome there. And I saw the good works that they did in and around where their big school was for rich kids, a school for rich kids.
Right.
Um, uh, and then I also in Bombay, Mumbai now, I met a nun who came originally from Belgium, but also just lived there most of her life. And she did work with the deaf and the blind and with prostitutes in the slums of Mumbai. And so I started to see that there was an other side to this faith, and that they did it out of faith. They didn't do it because a priest was telling them what to do. It was out of the goodness of their heart and their belief that there was that of God, obviously, in everyone. They weren't trying to convert anyone,
Mm.
um, uh, even though that's how the Christians obviously ended up there, because they did end up in India and other places to convert. So I think for me, it's always been more that power relationship. I've always been like, you know, with the underdog, not with the big power of imperialism, the big, you know. And so for me, the church and Christianity is very much part of that.
Mm.
Um, Putting their view on the rest of the world. Um,
Yeah, and
which,
I'm just
yeah.
wondering, you said about you went back to the roots having been brought up in the West, is how you put it to begin with, and then you've studied all of these Eastern religions. I mean, are you still of that worldview now? What has it shifted at all for you in terms of um, the West and the East and imperialism and the role of Christianity in the world?
uh, no, I still find that's a problematic thing in the world today. Uh, the power of the West and the power of uh, the so-called Christian world, where not many people go to church.
Because one of the ideas that I'm really interested in is this idea that cultural Christianity is everywhere, and even those of us who have not had a dream about Jesus are actually still deeply affected by this. And I'm just curious, really, that as many of us like you, worry about the power, as you call it, of
Mm.
the Christian Church, and yet what they're doing in Calcutta, for example, is feeding the poor and ministering to the needs of prostitutes and poverty-stricken children or whatever. So I'm just curious that those two things, what is the power that we're actually critical of?
Mm.
What is it that we're resistant to? Because we all talk about that, and certainly within Quakers in Britain at the moment, it's an absolutely dominant view. And yet I'm struck by the story that's really touched you in your life is this Jesuit priest and the nuns there tending to the needs of the poor. Um,
Which helped me to, in the long run, to um, feel at ease with the Christian uh, world or theme. Or but for me, Jesus is like the Buddha, is like Mohammed, is like, they're all the same. They were prophets
mm,
who had something very important to say and to bring to the world. Um, and yes, for me, there's, mm, yeah.
so there's still a universalism, I think, about what you're saying. And even though it's Jesus that came to you in the dream, you're not left with the feeling that they're all prophets, but that it's Jesus who is more prominent for you. You're not left with that. You're still left with the universalist idea.
Maybe not. I mean, it's so deep in me, I guess. The the Jesus figure. Um,
Mm.
I'm not sure, and I don't feel anything about Muhammad, for example, the prophet Muhammad. I do feel deeply about the teachings of the Buddha, and because that's also Buddhism is not really a religion, although it was made into a religion by in many countries. It really started as or is supposed to be a philosophy, and I guess that's what I find in Quakers, even though we have the root in Christianity, but it was against the powers that be, uh, against what priests tell us to do or not to do, being put in prison for it, and then saying, okay, we need to help people in prison, in the 17th century.
Mm.
So
So I'm really interested in your exploration of Krishnamurti, who I'm not familiar with at all. Um, can you say a bit more about what it was that drew you to that and why you left in the end? I mean, how is that related to your Quaker practices now?
Well, so Krishnamurti was someone who had been chosen by the Theosophists um, to be the next world healer. Um, so
Mm.
he would have been almost a new Jesus.
Right.
Uh, that's not how the Theosophists would say it, but anyway, so he was the chosen one by a few Western Theosophists who went to India to go back to the roots of Hinduism. So it all went back to, Hinduism really, and the root of Hinduism. And so they encountered this young man, Krishnamurti, and they saw in him a very pure being. Um, and he, at a certain point, said, "No, I'm not the next, guru or whatever. I'm against all gurus. People have to find out for themselves what is true.
Mm.
They need to experience, and you can only speak from your own experience." That is, of course, very similar to what we say in Quakers.
Yeah.
but Krishnamurti, so he spoke to groups of people. So this was in the, so he died in, can't remember when he died, in the early 1970s, most probably, or something. Um, so he went around the world talking about this and telling people, don't follow a guru, don't follow me. That's wrong. He had talks with the Buddhists, he had talks with the Christians as well to say, you've got it all wrong. We can only find out within ourselves by our own experience what the truth is. And don't listen what anybody is telling you. But then he was, of course, telling people all the time. And he had to keep on repeating the message, and people didn't get it because he always said, you're not getting it, you're not getting it. He was actually also a very angry man from the videos that I've seen of him, because I obviously never met him. He had died long time before. Um, but I was attracted to that teaching, and I had visited the Krishnamurti Center myself as a guest, and it was a quiet place. There were never more than 20 guests, mostly only 2 or 3 guests, in a beautiful building designed by an architect who knew about spiritual architecture. So it all was done in a way that you could feel the energy of the earth and the stars and everything. So, but living and working there, it also became clear that I would never be a Krishnamurtiite. Um, he said he didn't want any followers, but it was very clear that people who had been around Krishnamurti when he was still alive, or descendants of those people, or people who had been to a Krishnamurti school, were more closer to the truth of things. So,
Hmm.
as with any community, there were, these pitfalls, and there were these clashes between people.
Yeah.
Um, and yes, I think partly my friend getting unwell and then dying came at the same time that I felt, I've been here long enough.
Yeah.
And I couldn't really see myself following whatever Krishnamurti was. Well, we weren't supposed to follow it anyway, but the silence so kept coming back. So for me, I think that's something that keeps coming back, and that's why I also, even though um, I feel more a Quaker than anything else, insight meditation with lay people
Yeah.
in, but based on the Buddhist teachings, is very important to me. And when I was at the Krishnamurti Center, there was a silent room or a meditation room where one could go and sit quiet,
Yeah.
to just connect with what I now call uh, that of God within me, and that is in all of us.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think, yeah, from my understanding of Jesus and what I've read in the Bible, and um, is the what I deeply understand, more than from Buddhist teachings or Islam
Yeah.
or
Yes, I mean, there's something for me about the roots, our roots of where we have come from ourselves as individuals. I think it's deeply important and it affects us in ways that we just don't really understand. And it's one of the reasons that I turned back to Christianity and what it could teach me, because it's simply the wisdom tradition that I've been steeped in and bred from, I mean, it's really, really something that I understand deeply. One of the things you were just saying about talking from our own experiences, and that's really important within Quakers. And you've spoken very deeply. And that's where I think we can really get to know each other in the things which are eternal by having these conversations about your experience and your background. So let me come to the one of the other things that's really interesting is that you've worked for Quakers for so long. And you mentioned there that the staff don't even have to be Quaker. Now, this has always been something that's really exercised me. Um, and as I've mentioned somewhere else with a member of staff, these are very deep interviews, really get to the heart of who someone is and what they're speaking from. And it gives me certainly a confidence in um, seeing a kind of a fellowship with others. And I worry sometimes that not all staff would be able to do this. This is a really deep experience, You've really got to be spiritually experienced and robust, if you like, to sit here and talk like this. So I mean, I really appreciate everyone going along with it. But I just question again this idea that as well as, I mean, the staff who are not Quakers who come and work for us, I mean, very, very well intentioned, very, very lovely people. So I have no doubts about that. But is there something that's missing from that support experience that we get from staff when there isn't that deep spiritual connection within our faith tradition?
When I say not everyone, you don't have to be a Quaker, but in most senior positions, you do have to be, and you are. Most of them are Quakers. All my senior colleagues in Quaker life were Quaker, were people who were in membership and had been in membership. Um, uh, so I was in an admin support role, and I had other colleagues who were, but I think it is important to, yes, to have a deep understanding of what Quakers is about. But what I've seen in at Friend's house was the same as in the Krishnamurti Center. Again, the power dynamics between people needing to put a stamp on something because you're there doing this. And each one of us having our own interpretation of, what we should do going forward. And of course, the staff at Friend's House is concerned, just like you and I guess, about the future of Quakers. And try to do the right thing to make that happen. And I guess that is only possible if you are a Quaker yourself, and I feel you should have, yes, uh, a regular practice going to meeting, and which we of course did. I mean, I was in Quaker Life, and we started most meetings with, some silence. I had more meetings for worship as a staff member, I guess, than outside. And I guess can't remember what I was going to say. Something about the future of Quakers. So I felt it was often about the numbers.
Yeah.
And I felt often that Quaker Life Representative Council, which I thought was a very important experience for a lot of people. I heard so much feedback during the weekend itself from people coming from everywhere in the UK, anywhere in the UK, sometimes from a very small meeting, and had not felt supported and felt they really could get something out of Quaker Life Representative Council by meeting people who were doing things a bit differently in their meeting, etc.
Yeah.
But that didn't that activity didn't make the community grow in the eyes of uh, the powers that be.
Mm.
It was more important to do all sorts of outreach in whatever way. Whereas I think inreach is so important, and supporting one another in the inreach. But that you can't translate in numbers. So when I look at the future of Quakers, I can't really imagine a world without Quakers. But I also cannot see that the number of Quakers is all of a sudden going to become as big as all the people who go to Buddhist meditation um, uh, or to happy clappy churches, where there is this pool of some more outward, I guess.
Yeah, you see, I mean, that's where my thinking is going. That I really don't like this bums on seats approach, which I think is the a bit of a facetious way to say it. But just pursuing the numbers for me is just an end, a cul-de-sac, if you like, and it's not going to end up working out. I mean, if God wants Quakers to survive, we will survive. And if God wants more people to enjoy meeting for worship, then it's because of the spiritual depth and the spiritual practice and the experience that we have together. And what worries me is the analysis that's happening at, as you say, the powers that be, whether that's trustees or management meeting or Quaker Life or wherever it is, sufferings perhaps, these committees, the analysis that we need to go out and tell people more, but without proselytizing, because or without being evangelical, because we're not that. It feels to me like it's just looking in the wrong place. And I've started to say to people, more religion, less politics is, if you like, the strapline, I think, of what I'm interested in at the moment, because we are, I don't know if dumbing down is quite what we're doing, but we're certainly, over the centuries, we seem to have made our spiritual practice smaller and smaller and smaller and less demanding. So we've ended up with, I mean, as you say, a 45-minute practice once a month. Now, that's just one thing that you've said there, but that might be some Quakers' only thing that they do. Um, Now, hopefully, with online meetings, people have got more options now to go and do more stuff. But what I would really like to see is more concentration on these deep conversations and spiritual practice. What is our daily or weekly spiritual practices that bind us? And let the numbers look after themselves.
I totally agree, and I feel, and it's so difficult though. Just I wanted to go back to going to meeting and sitting in meeting and not having anyone telling you what to do. For me, in some ways has become easier over the years, but sometimes also much more difficult. And I actually appreciate it each time there is a reading from Advices and Queries, or someone mentions something from Quaker Faith and Practice, because that, or something from the Bible. We have someone in our meeting who is very knowledgeable. And when she ministers something from, St. John, or it's like, oh my God, yes, that's why I'm here. And then it all makes sense again. And then I can feel how important it is,
Mm.
what we do when we are worshiping together. But it's not easy, and the one meeting of 45 minutes once a month, for me personally, goes deeper than the weekly meeting with 50 or 60 people, where there is often a very scattered energy.
Yeah.
A lot of people are involved in very good things, activism, environmental issues, the Palestine question. And I'm organizing next week an EAP talk, an ecumenical accompaniers program, Palestine program and Israel program. God, I will get it right. EAPPI.
Mhm.
Um, uh, and all these things are important, but as you said, I miss the often the spiritual, the deep, uh, the faith. Yes, and having faith for me always means two things. You have this conversation because you want to talk about the Quaker faith. Um, but for me, faith is also having faith in, faith in what is there
Trust.
and trust in myself and in that of God in me and feeling that there is that of God in everyone,
Mm.
in those terrible people who are for the moment making terrible decisions in the world,
Mhm.
from the very rich to the politicians in power, and that they've been so messed up as I have been messed up in my life in the past, and that it's a lot of hard work to come through that. Something I haven't wanted to talk about is, you know, a lot of people have had abuse in their life.
Mm.
And I'm one of them, and it happened in a Catholic setting.
Mm.
So that was a reason for me to also not really wanting to have much to do with any Catholics or a Catholic setting.
Mm.
Um, but I could see that, not everyone obviously is an abuser in the Catholic Church. So, and those abusers have had have been messed up by one way or the other. So how can we? So so what I find in Quakers, in the Quaker faith, is yes, we have that faith that there is that of God in everyone, and that can only be a very, very positive thing,
Yeah.
um, and and a good thing, and a thing that should be at everything that we do as Quakers. And that is, as you say, the spiritual, the deep. That is the inreach, not the outreach, because
Yeah.
from that inreach, and a lot of people who work on outreach, they know that and they believe that.
Yes.
I mean, I know you've spoken with someone, another conversation, who is very big on outreach, and he reached very deep inside. I know that. I've heard him minister, and uh, I always think like, oh God, yes, I just needed to hear this. And
Mhm. Well, that's right, and I'm not denigrating outreach. I'm very involved in that myself, and I love
yeah,
the Make a Quest program and all of
yeah,
that. And these videos are part of reaching out.
yes, yeah,
It's a strange paradox that you need to reach in because that will reach out. You can let your life speak. And I suppose I'm also thinking that one of the things that we've lost is some of this the deep messages that George Fox and those early Quakers really found was that Christ has come to teach us ourselves. And something that Roy Stevenson said in one of these videos, he said, I took a long time to grow up, and I thought, oh gosh, me too. And something in what you said earlier made me think of the same thing. And yet it's taken me to get to my 50s where I've been softened enough and felt safe enough to accept this teaching from the Bible, from people wiser than me. And there's always been perhaps in my 20s, and there's more of a defensiveness really around that. Um, and some, as you've said, traumatic experiences really that can prevent you from hearing those messages. But I suppose there's so much in what you've just said that I agree with. You know, part of what I feel like I'm saying to Quakers is ye of little faith. You know, if you're focusing on the numbers game, you're not having faith. You're not showing true faith. And this is what we need to go back to, is to focus on the fact that Christ has come to teach us himself. And let's really grow in that individually and spiritually. And, you know, thinking about the structures that we have, I think they've become so rigid that they're almost now designed to keep themselves going. And as you've said, in other communities, it happens the same in all religious communities. We have this problem. So it's not a particular criticism that I don't think Quakers are particularly bad at, but we suffer from the same issues, and we've become this rigid staff structure, which is quite large still for the numbers of people that we have in membership. And it makes me think, you know, I would like to see, dare I say it, a reduction in the number of staff that we have and a return to being, you know, focusing inwards, focusing on our spiritual practice. And let's reassess what we're doing in the world because it worries me that we're all over the world doing these important things. We talk about climate change, we talk about Palestine, and we don't talk about these things that are happening in our neighborhoods quite as much. And I hope we will reassess what our faith is in, um, you know, and perhaps rein in some of this political action. So yeah, more religion, less politics.
When you say we're not looking at what's happening here, do you mean like spiritually, or because most Quakers also reach out to people who are, um, you know, poor in our um, country, in our area, involved in food bank stuff and things like that.
Yeah,
And when you say the staff, so when I was at friend's house, I always felt there was so much to do. We were given so much work, organizational,
I know.
admin, etc., that I thought there are not too many of us, truly. But when I, yeah, when I'm now that I'm out of it and I'm just being a Quaker in my local community and in my area, and I don't really get involved and know what's happening for the moment at the national level.
No.
Um, and of course, if you have a big group like sufferings, you also need to manage that. So that you need administrative support to have something like sufferings happening.
Yeah.
But so then it's looking at how can I change that? Because I think we get into this, yeah, they this and they that, but I am the only one who can really change.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because obviously when I was on Quaker Life Central Committee, I could see that there's a lot of this, you know, we need to do this, we need to do something about that, and then there's a huge program of work that we give to staff. And I'm just not convinced by that model anymore.
mm, mm,
I've I've lost trust in that as a way of acting in the world. Look at these videos as an example. I mean, somebody in the process of declining an interview with me said something like, you know, well, you're not getting paid. It's an awful lot of work for a few videos. And I thought, you know, this isn't work that I feel I need to get paid for. Um, and therefore, I mean, one of the things we can do individually is, and I've heard other people say, you know, they've stopped giving money to BYM. And I can see that there's a deep for me there's a deep spiritual urgency to that. That I've stopped giving money to the central work. And I am conflicted about it still, but I still feel it's the right thing to do. because I think we're getting we're getting led astray somehow. That's what worries me. Um, and yet, one of the reasons for that is because I am going into prison so much, and I speak to a lot of men caught up in the criminal justice system, and spiritually and politically, they're in a slightly different place from many Quakers. So many Quakers are comfortable, self-satisfied, you might say. We describe ourselves in white and middle class, but actually it's more than that. I think it's more about we found our place in the world. We're fairly comfortable. Progressive politics has become what all Quakers are. And that's the monoculture that I have a problem with. And I think that I take Quaker silence and Quaker worship into prisons every week, and they love it. And many chaplains know the same. So it's not that our worship doesn't have something to offer to all different types of people. And I'm reading a novel now about the early Quakers, looking at the Valiant 60 going around with George Fox, and there's people of all sorts there, you know. And that's what concerns me, is that we've become this left-wing little pressure group. And that to me is the knot that needs unraveling before we can really, fire up again.
Yeah. I feel I'm part of that, the left wing. But at the same time, I often still feel like an outsider because I'm still here with my accent and with my Belgian background. Um, but that, yeah, to me, that doesn't really matter. It's about what you bring to that meeting for worship. Whether like you go into prison or whether I go to my own meeting. What do I bring there? What do I offer there for whoever is there that week? And that for me is the core of my faith.
Yeah.
It's not about the decisions that are being made by a friend's house. And the model in every religion, in every organization. I've always worked for charities my whole life. And every charity needs to go through a restructuring to make things better. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm 60 now. I really can't bear another restructuring in another organization, because guess what? It's not going to make much of a difference as long as we're true to the goals that we have set, whether it's in international development, refugees, Quakerism, faith, that's what's important, and be there and be open to the spirit. So yes, and I, as we know, as you know, from Quaker Life, it's gone now to local development workers, who should cost less money because they live in the locality where they're supposed to work. So and I
Yeah.
don't know if that's making any difference, and how one would prove that.
Well, let's move into then the final question, which is around your hopes for the
Yeah,
future of Quakers, because that's where this video interview series came from.
yeah.
Future of Quakers in Britain. What what are your fears or your hopes?
No real fears, I think, from what I see around me, and um, the last year I've traveled a lot in the UK, and each time tried to go to a meeting where if I was somewhere on a Sunday,
Hmm.
to go to meeting for worship. And what is obvious to all of us, of course, is that we are dealing with an elderly um, society, and that more and more people are disappearing. and that fewer young people come to meeting. Uh, but it doesn't make sense to me to see that as a fear, because it's just a fact of life. And when we go back to, like you said, to George Fox, etc., what were they? How did they, do this thing
Mm.
with very few people? And yeah, and I know the Quaker faith in numbers is very small in this country and in the world. I mean, much bigger in the US and in Kenya, compared to other Christian groups there. Um, but at the same time, when I go out and I speak with people and I say, I'm a Quaker, there's like, oh yes, the Quakers, and they do all this good work. And I'm like, yes, but our number is so small. How know that you all know about this and that you hear about this and that we do all this great work?
Mm.
Um, and it's yeah. So my hope is that we just keep on doing it. And focus more on the spiritual, yeah, and the inner world. And yes, I think because I'm just going to become a member, hopefully, if my
I hope
visit
so.
my visit goes well, or my clearness uh, meeting for clearness. So I look at the future of Quakers as, very much being part of my life, and hoping to contribute from the little that I can do within my community, and hopefully in work in prison, to make a difference. Because I mean, God knows it's more than ever needed in this world that seems to be going mad, totally mad. I have not had much hope actually for the world since 9/11, so that's 2001. So that's 24 years,
Mm.
and it's only getting worse. So for me, there is a real need in having this faith and having this community that I can be part of. Uh, and of course, I hope we can. I went around town putting up posters, come to this important talk by this friend who spent a couple of months in the West Bank, and see what the difference we can make by being an observer,
Mm.
by being an unattached observer. And I guess that's what we do in our worship, observing what comes up. And I'm not someone who talks a lot in meeting. I don't really feel I have. I believe there needs to be a real shaking when I'm in meeting for worship, to have verbal ministry. But I think the non-verbal ministry, as you said, when you go into prison and you offer the silence, a meeting for worship, that is all we can do.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers the questions about
Well,
fears and hopes.
it's a good start. It's a good start. Yeah, well, thank you so much, Marlene, for it's always a pleasure talking to you, and it's been really good to get to know you better today. Thank you.
And it's been good for me, and it's been lovely to do this together with you too. And good luck.
Thank you.